in the spirit of debate, build strong arguments with strong reason and strong logic. They're not experts in the sense that they have been flown in especially to give a presentation. They're students who feel passionately about these ideas and care. So I have the larger agenda of seeking understanding in the context of a God-honoring way, and not make it simply about our individual agendas. Although, of course, you do have your individual perspectives. That is indeed the point. The other thing I would say is when we're talking and when you're talking, make eye contact to the degree that you're interacting. Eye contact reminds us the other person that you're talking to is a human being. That would be very useful. Let's all try to listen in order to understand, not listen to look for a response. Responses will come, but let's seek understanding as we listen. And feel free, when it's appropriate, to ask each other, and when you have a question time, ask clarifying questions. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't assume someone is saying something that they might not. And watch our body language as we communicate, because that can communicate, as we know, more than even our spoken words at times. Feel free to tell your stories and tell folks why your story and your perspective is important to you. Where does it come from? We all have different experiences. Listen to other stories with grace and respect. And if you experience discomfort, the question to ask yourself is, why am I feeling this discomfort? That's often one of the most interesting points. Why? Why am I reacting the way that I am? It's okay to disagree. We want to simply do so with love and respect. And take the opportunity when we're finished to follow up with each other, continue the conversation in the hallway. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Cosden. I really appreciate those words. And now, without further ado, we will have the debaters introduce each other.
I have the privilege today to introduce Jason McLellan, the debater on my left. He grew up in an Amish community without electricity and never went to school. He spent his time working in his father's rustic wood business. He will graduate next spring in psychology. The past 3 consecutive years, Jason has lived in the country with the 3rd largest Muslim population in the world. He lived unsponsored, ministering to slum youth, and taught himself dentistry to help underprivileged kids. He has fixed hundreds of smiles. He has been to Canada, Italy, Germany, France, Nepal, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and India. His second strangest language is Urdu, an Islamic language, followed by Telugu. He lived in the inner city and ministered to youth after leaving the farm in 2007, and has spent much of his time helping refugees get settled in the USA since. With expertise in fashion design, photography, painting, weaving, metallurgy, botany, interior design, carpentry, violin, and sushi making, it's safe to say that Jason is a multi-talented artist and an avid reader. He received his associate's degree from Grand Rapids Community College, from which he graduated with academic excellence and honors. Here he was a student instructor, taught tutorial master classes, and has been a guest speaker on the topics of psychology, culture, and the Telugu script. He intends to acquire his Master of Psychology and profess. He will never stop pursuing learning, creativity, laughter, and people's needs. Jason is here this evening as a passionate opposition to the motion tonight.
The debater on my right is Mitch Mallary. Mitch Mallary is a senior in the honors program here at Judson, majoring in both Christian theology and biblical studies. Throughout his time at Judson, he has been involved in cross-country, student leadership, and is the founder of Kenosis, the organization hosting this evening's debate. Throughout the course of his life, Mitch has been the recipient of numerous awards. In 2012, he was announced as the Student Athlete of the Year for the state of Illinois, for qualifying to state for the 7th time and graduating as valedictorian of his high school class. He has also been inducted into the Theta Alpha Kappa National Honor Society for excellence in biblical theology and studies. Mitch also has a passion for international travel, spending time in Spain, Belize, Gibraltar, and Morocco. He also spent his summers traveling across the country attending academic conferences in New Jersey, Michigan, Oklahoma, California, Texas, and Colorado. As of now, he is deciding between Yale and the University of St. Andrews for graduation school next fall. He is arguing in favor of tonight's motion.
Thank you. And now, if we can get the slide up, you will be able to vote right now on whether you believe Islam is compatible with the United States of America on the website, or you can text in your answer. I believe it's A, B, or C. I will do so myself. And in a couple minutes after a lot of us have done so, we can pull it up on the screen and see where we are now as a whole. And at the end of the debate, depending on who all is here, even the live streamers can go to the link. It should be in the description and vote for it as well.
It's showing post-debate. Yeah.
Oh, Dan, could you put up pre-debate? That would be nice.
These are nice pictures, though.
Oh, wait. I'm not sure he knows how to do that. You need to go to the debate question, pre-debate, and then put it up live. It should have like a little symbol. Is it working?
We'll see right now.
All right, there we go. So if you wrote into the other one that wasn't correct, you need to fill into this one.
No. Go back.
Oh.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
I guess it's processing all the votes.
You shouldn't let them see it. It sway their opinion. Close your eyes.
All right.
Was that the result?
So the majority said maybe, which is an interesting outcome because we will then find out how you will be swayed at the end of this debate, whether you made an opinion away from maybe. It was 40% maybe, and then I believe yes was the next place.
I couldn't vote. They received the maximum amount of votes possible.
Really? Oh wow.
Me too.
Well, I guess that means there's a cap. Okay, we will then go on with the debate. You have to be the first. You have to be the first to vote, I guess.
There's a speed element. All right.
So, without further ado, we will go on, knowing that the majority said maybe. We'll see what the quickest people do in the end. It's the motion's opening statement. He has now 20 minutes to describe his opening statement. Thank you.
All right, technology issues aside, I'm going to just dive right in. First thing we're going to do is we are going to play a game. The name of the game is Who Said It? The Quran or the Bible? The rules are actually pretty simple. I'm going to place individual passages from both texts on the screen, and you are going to decide whether or not you think it's in the Quran or the Bible. Are you with me so far? Let's start with an easy one, all right? It was decreed upon the children of Israel that whoever kills a soul unless for corruption done in the land, it is as if he had slain humankind entirely. And whoever saves one, it is as if he had saved humankind entirely. Who says this is in the Quran? Who says this is in the Bible? Okay. Not everyone answered that question. Hopefully next time we will all answer yes. But this is in Quran 5:32. Let's move on to the next one. If men get into a fight with one another, and the wife of one intervenes to rescue her husband from the grip of his opponent by reaching out and seizing his genitals, you shall cut off her hand and show no pity. Who says this one's in the Quran? Who says this one's in the Bible? You guys took Dr. Wallace. All right, so yes, that's Deuteronomy 25. All right, let's do a couple more. I am against you, says the Lord, and will lift up the skirts over your face, and I will let nations look on your nakedness and kingdoms on your shame. I will throw feces at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle for all to see. Do you guys happen to know which one this is? Bible? Quran? Alright, it's in the Bible. And the last one. This is actually the most important quote. The angel said, O Mary, indeed God gives you glad tidings of a word from him, whose name will be the Messiah, Jesus. Who says this is in the Quran? Who says this one's in the Bible? This one's in Quran, chapter 3, verse 45. Just so you know, all of your grades have been recorded, and for everyone you missed, you lose a chapel credit. It's out of my control. But in all seriousness, why did I go through this exercise? On the one hand, I could go on all day citing passage after passage of the horrific passages in the Bible. We have the conquest narratives of God commanding the violation and slaughtering of innocent people. And then there's the command that if a woman was being raped but she didn't cry out for help, that she would be stoned to death. There were some really horrific passages. On the other hand, I could go on citing passage after passage, 50 in total, where the Quran declares that being faithful to Allah entails upholding justice. Not the legal system justice in America where we disproportionately emphasize retribution and revenge, but the restorative justice of shalom that characterizes a world where the oppressed are liberated and their persecutors are exposed for their evil doing. But the Quran is explicit. The way in which justice is enacted in this life is through generosity, hospitality, tolerance, and honesty. If you want a document of all these passages, come find me after the debate. But the problem is, we live in a post-truth world. The oft-quoted phrase that knowledge is power has it backwards. Power, it seems, determines what is true. We see this in our history books, where the victors get to write history. And some would say we see this in the media or even Washington, D.C. There's also the fact that I, standing behind this podium today, am granted a degree of power. With enough selectivity from positive passages in the Quran and certain negative passages from the Bible, throw in a little bit of charm and humor, I could conceivably, though that's not my intention, convince you of something that's not true. Now I want to be clear, I am not here to convince you to become Muslim. And heck, I'm not even here to convince you to become a Christian. But I am here with what I consider to be a sacred task. As a Christian myself, I take seriously the Bible's summons to worship God not only with our hearts, but also with our minds. And sometimes that means we need to take ourselves seriously and make ourselves intellectually vulnerable to viewing the world in ways we hadn't before. I really mean this is a part of what it means to love our neighbors as ourselves. If we know nothing about our Muslim brothers and sisters other than what our Uncle Joe said while he was a little bit tipsy at Thanksgiving, how can we say that we love our neighbors as ourselves? So tonight, I'm asking you all to be a little bit vulnerable. I'm asking you to set aside, to the degree that you're possible, certainty. This means I'm asking you to be open to adopting to what I consider to be a more loving, compassionate, and intellectually honest understanding of the world. An openness that recognizes there are always 49 shades of gray. Not everything we do in America is right. I want to say that again. Not everything we do here is morally praiseworthy. But sometimes, even though it's hard to admit, we are far more like the people we demonize than we're comfortable with acknowledging. With that in mind, let's turn our attention to the motion this evening. Is Islam compatible with America? In my view, this raises three other questions. One, what is Islam? Two, what are American values? And three, what makes something compatible with American values? During this presentation, we will only address the first of these questions because I think it's really important we understand what Islam is. The latter two will be addressed later. At any rate, for those of you in this audience, there's also a fourth question you must ask: whether your Christian faith is compatible with American values in the first place. But for now, I want to turn our attention to Skittles. As you may have noticed, there is a big jar of Skittles on the podium this morning, and you all filled out a survey asking how many Muslims there are in America and across the world. How many of you said 3,200? That's not correct, but if each of these Skittles represents 500,000 Muslims, then what you see before your eyes is a visual representation of the 1.6 billion Muslims across the world. To put that into perspective, in 2 weeks I turned 23 years old. If I would have counted every single second of my life up since the moment I was born, I'd only be halfway. Only when I turned 50 in 2044 would I arrive at the 1.6 billionth second of my life. Can you even imagine meeting a new person who happens to be a Muslim every single second over the course of 50 years? The reason I spend so much time focusing on these details is because you are going to hear a lot of numbers coming from the opposition today. Some of these I will dispute. Others will clearly be alternative facts. But as you listen to them, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Based upon the 2015 estimates of the United States intelligence community, ISIS, or ISIL, has between 9,000 and 18,000 members. The highest estimates come from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which believes that ISIS, including its supporters, total around 80 to 100,000 people. To assume the larger end of that spectrum, that amounts to a whopping 0.01% of the Islamic community. So, if I took one of these Skittles right here and I cut it in half, not once, but twice, we would have a quarter of a Skittle. This is the visual representation of the size of ISIS in comparison to the entire Islamic community. So if this is what the opposition means tonight when he says that Islam is incompatible with America, then we might be able to agree. But if he says that this is what is incompatible with America, then we fundamentally disagree. I would therefore like to propose to the audience this evening that the only way to answer no to the proposition is for the opposition to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the majority of the Islamic community across the world are in fact not Muslim at all. The only way to successfully claim that Islam is incompatible with America is for the opposition to show that the political extremists represented by ISIS are the only interpreters of the Quran who understand its overarching message, that this fraction of the Skittle is more representative of the Islamic faith than all of these. Keep that in mind as we now explore our first question. Some of you may have heard about the 5 pillars of Islam. While the 5 pillars are crucial aspects of the Islamic faith, they are not something Muslims talk about themselves on a daily basis. It's only for when people like me, a non-Muslim, ask them what it means to be Muslim. So let's take a look at these. The first pillar contains the basic article of faith. There is no God but God. The second pillar pertains to prayer life, including the 5 daily prayers. The third is about fasting, particularly during the month of Ramadan. The fourth entails almsgiving, giving financially to the poor. And the fifth and final pillar is the Hajj, the once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage to Mecca. And someone far more intelligent than I once noted that each of these have a unique temporal dimension. The first is constant, the second is daily, the third lasts a month, the fourth is annual, and the fifth is once in a lifetime. These 5 pillars lie at the very heart of the Islamic faith. They may be summed up as faith, prayer, fasting, charity, and spiritual growth. If you didn't know I was already talking about Islam, you might think I was talking about Christianity. But of course, Christianity and Islam have 2 different sacred texts. So let's talk briefly about the Quran. Most people assume that the Quran is essentially the equivalent to the Christian Bible, but that's slightly misleading. The Quran is more significant to Islam than the Bible is to Christianity. Whereas we Christians believe that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us in Christ, the Islamic faith believes that the Word became words. And that's why the aesthetic of reading the Quran in Arabic is so important, because the Word became words. So you can almost say that the Quran is to Islam what Jesus is to Christianity. That being said, I want you to focus with me on a really, really important point. If this were a test, I would circle, highlight, underline, star, whatever it is you do, because this point stands fundamentally at odds with the proposition's motion of the opposition. The Quran is not about the Prophet Muhammad. I'll say it again for the people in the back. The Quran is not about the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, whereas Jesus is mentioned by name 25 times, Muhammad is mentioned by name only 4 times. And both of those pale in comparison to Moses, who is mentioned 136 times. All that is to say, the Quran is about faithful obedience to Allah, just as the Bible is about faithful obedience to Christ. So when the opposition brings up actions attributed to Muhammad late in his life, mostly by radical conspiracy theorists online, may you be certain to remember that the Quran is not about the Prophet Muhammad. Now let's turn our attention to the elephant in the room, Sharia law. I'm very eager to take a look at your word association surveys because I'm pretty sure we have some prejudice against Sharia law in this room. Others of you may not have an idea of what it is, but I want to focus on 2 things. 1, what Sharia law is, and 2, how it works. I'm actually excited to talk about this because once you grasp those 2 concepts, no matter how many statistics the opposition gives us declaring that Muslims all over the world support Sharia law, it will fall flat on deaf ears because you will know better. So let's talk about Sharia law. The first point we should all recognize is that Sharia literally means a path to life-giving water. It's interesting to note at this point that the Torah, the law of the Old Testament, derives from the word Yara, which means essentially the same thing. Curious, isn't it? Both Sharia and Yara thus entail a way of living that leads to true life. Be faithful to Allah and find the path to life-giving water. Be faithful to Yahweh and find true life. The second point we must emphasize greatly is that the word Sharia is not found in the Quran. Unlike the Old Testament Levitical codes, where you have a list that clearly indicates the laws of the Torah, there's no Sharia section of the Quran. That deserves repeating. There is no Sharia section of the Quran. Anybody who quotes a passage from the Quran and says Sharia says this or Sharia says that has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Let me just throw some shade at my opponent briefly, who I have personally heard say that Sharia means that Muslim men can cut off their wife's hand for talking back. You all remember that passage from Deuteronomy, right? You know, and then there's the whole Jesus thing where he encourages his own followers to cut off their own hands. It really is mind-boggling when people so carelessly use the phrase Sharia says ... Sharia doesn't say anything. Write it down, tell Uncle Joe, do whatever it takes. That leads me to my third point. Sharia is for Muslims what theology is for Christians. According to a recent survey, the #1 answer from Muslims in America was that Sharia is a, quote, guide to the personal practice of Islam that is up to the individual Muslim to define. The #1 answer is that it's a guide to the personal practice of Islam up to the individual Muslim to define. I don't know about you, but that sounds a heck of a lot like Protestant Christians. They believe that the theology is not determined by this magisterial church, but is a guide to the personal practice of faith up to the individual Christian to define. You with me so far? I want to give this a little more time. If a Christian wants to determine whether or not an action is ultimately consistent with their faith, they should typically use a logic somewhat similar to this. You pray, read the Bible, look at church history, you talk to a pastor, and maybe a small group. Though in reality it might look like think about it for 15 seconds, to do whatever it is, and possibly repent afterwards, it really should be something like the former. The former is very close to the logic of Sharia law. For Muslims, they move from the Quran to the Hadith to analogical reasoning, and then to the interests of the community. According to Sharia logic, one must consider all of these factors. In other words, they must not only read the Quran, but must also turn to a collection of sayings called the Hadith, which are authoritatively inferior to the Quran. And though Dr. Wallace would kill me for saying this, the Hadith are viewed in Islam kind of the way that a lot of evangelical Christians view the Old Testament. And after the Hadith, they turn to Islamic history and look for a general consensus. They then appeal to analogical reasoning. For example, if the Quran says don't talk back to your parents, it probably also means don't hit your parents. And then, after analogical reasoning, they turn to the best interests of the community. Only after analyzing all of these factors can they say that an action is faithful to Islam. But let me be absolutely clear, and this is key, focus in real quick, because Sharia law is the necessary logic that individual Muslims follow when determining whether or not an action is consistent, meaning that this means that no individual passage in the Quran is equivalent with Sharia law. Sharia law dictates that something must be in accord not only with the overarching message of the Quran, but also with the Hadith, the largest consensus in Islamic history, analogical reasoning, and the best interests of the global community. No single passage in the Quran or the Hadith, no matter how much the opposition desires to persuade you, is equivalent with Sharia law. Sharia law doesn't say anything. It's simply a guide to the personal practice of their faith. And for those of you who are zoning out, tune back in again, because faithful Muslims must follow this logic in different historical contexts. And when you follow it in different historical contexts, this means that there's no such thing as a universal or timeless Sharia law. The needs of the community may change 3 months from now, and one action that was previously deemed okay could in fact now be prohibited. Just like you don't believe Deuteronomy should be followed today, is kind of the same way that most Muslims interpret the killing the infidel passage in the Quran, just as that was prescribed in a very specific historical context 1400 years ago, is inconsistent today with the overarching message of the Islamic faith. So when you have 0.01% of Muslims declaring that Sharia law requires one to, quote, kill the infidel, you can rest assured that this is not the majority consensus. In fact, because Sharia law takes into consideration the consensus belief of Islamic history, the radicalized interpretation represented by ISIS is immediately thrown out the door as a non-option. Seeing as my time is running out, I'm going to end my opening presentation on that point. But I am going to leave you all with this important reminder. The only way to successfully defend the claim that Islam is incompatible with America is for the opposition to show, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the political extremists represented by ISIS are the only interpreters of the Quran who understand its overarching message. With that word of caution, I hand the floor over to the opposition.
All right, so to start throwing out the false information, the first one is, I never said that a Muslim can cut off his wife's hand. I need that quote, Mitch, so please produce that. And so before I get going on this whole topic being the evil opposition, I want to thank you all so much for coming out and thank all of my friends for being here and supporting me. And I want to thank my family who drove 4 hours to come and hear me, and all the rest of you that are watching live around the world. Hello, India. And to move on, I want to tell you a story. And so a lot of you are probably thinking, wait a minute, Jason is that really annoying, dogmatic, eccentrically dressing individual we see around campus. And a lot of you probably didn't know a lot of the information in my introduction. And I just forget. It's a part of me sometimes, I forget about it. And so I have a bunch of really random pictures of either my photography, my artwork, or my experiences in India, some of which are taken from my little iPhone. Speaking of India, I want to jump right into my life in India, where I lived in a unique city because it was an independent city from Indian rule, an Islamic dynasty the entire time. So it was a Muslim city inside of a Hindu country, so it had this wonderful complex, a sociologist's dream come true, to be able to study these two people groups living in a city. And I was sitting there on my stone floor on which I sleep every day for 3 years on a 1/2 inch straw mat. Now the water would run whenever I had the gumption to run with the bucket. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of running water. And we were sitting there on my stone in probably somewhere between 110 and 115 degrees as per this Indian summer. And we got the news about the earthquake in Nepal. And I said, I have to go. Thousands of people had been killed. And I'd been to Nepal. These were my friends. And I called up my Nepali friends and I said, are you all right? Are you near where this happened? And they said, no, I'm in India, but my mom is there. And so I then started thinking, what can I do? Who am I? I only have $300. What am I going to be able to do? And so, of course, I told myself, I'm not going to go, right? The second earthquake struck. And I said, I have to go. Now, I was still looking for excuses because I called up my friend who I was sure wouldn't come with me and said, do you want to go to Nepal? Can you come with me? And he said, let's go. And so we scrambled and we boarded a train from Secunderabad and we drove 48 hours to the Nepali border in Raxal for $8 and 1,000 miles. And we got there and boarded this useless pony cart, and the Muslim driver starts beating the pony. The pony finally decides he's had enough, and he revolts and collapses, tangled in the harnesses. And I pull all my luggage off of him, and we're running across the border. And we finally got out, very near the epicenter of the earthquake, and managed to give all of the money that I had saved up from teaching music there in India to this little village that my Indian church had connected me with there. We didn't even know if we were going to be able to connect, but it worked out. And so I spent the majority of my time, obviously doing that and cleaning the teeth of the people there. So I trained myself in oral hygiene because that's what the people needed. And when I was there, I saw so many people who had fallen on the rocks and broken their front teeth. And I had lost a front tooth, and I finally said, Lord, I tried to help a lot of students with, previous dental stuff in India. And I said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix the teeth. I'm going to get the equipment and learn how to use monomethacrylate cured resin and be able to fix classical restorations with having occlusal strength to work. And so I did it. And I stayed at many late nights, 3 a.m., learning how to do this. And I want to tell you that Muslim teeth and Hindu teeth repair in just the same manner. You use 35% phosphoric acid to etch them, and you build up with resin until you get the exact shape and color that you want. And now, it was very interesting that he framed this entire debate around one thing. That if I can prove ISIS is for some reason the majority, then I'm screwed. And I don't know where he got that logic, because that definitely wasn't the logic that I came with. And so, one thing that just makes me come out here and be so passionate about this is my love for the Muslim people. I met many people from the Middle East, from Yemen and Saudi and Pakistan and so many other places while I was in India, and obviously I lived in an Indian neighborhood and in a Muslim neighborhood. And so I have no hate for anybody, and I definitely do not think that Islam is incompatible, because the majority, his half of a being, equals the whole pot of beings. That is by no means a logical analysis of what's happening in the world. What we do need an explanation for is 2,000 people were either killed or injured by jihadists this month in 22 different countries in 120 different attacks. And we need a logical explanation for why on all corruption indexes around the world, Muslim countries are the most politically and financially corrupt. And we need a logical explanation for why the gender gap in age and politics and economics is 100% inferior, regardless of the GDP, in all Islamic countries. We need an explanation for this. This is injustice, and God hates this, and we need to stop talking around an academic conversation when we have people and lives that are being destroyed. Women that are told you can never drive. Women that are told you can never become a politician. Women that have their genitals ripped out of them without anesthesia. And you want to talk in academic language about ISIS. How are genitals ripped out of girls? They're often done it with a piece of broken glass. Now, it's actually a good idea because it doesn't cross-contaminate. a beautiful, delicate girl's life. Christ. And we want to talk about a half a bean. I'm not here to talk about a half a bean. I'm here to talk about 1.6 billion Muslims that call Mohammed holy. That's what I'm here to talk about. A man who slept with a 9-year-old girl. These are husband and wives, okay? We're talking about injustice. We're not talking about something that's a minor detail here. We're talking about a man who they are calling holy, who is now the #1 name in the world. You don't name somebody after somebody unless you admire that individual. We go to the next slide. And then we get a wonderful apologist telling us the definition of Islam, the word definition is peace. Is peace a logical definition, a logical analysis for what I just described in the world? I don't know what their definition of peace is, but that's not satisfactory. 52% of the children in my neighborhood were sexually abused equally among boys and girls. Peace is not a logical explanation for that. Next slide. So, the real definition, the word definition of Islam is submission. Now, they will tell you it means peace because they believe full peace will be given when everything is in submission to Allah. So we have the Shahada, which he missed. The Shahada is the confession of faith from all Muslims, not the radicals. All Muslims will agree, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his prophet. Next slide. Christianity, we understand there's parallels, very, very similar. They work very similar. Jesus is perfect, Muhammad is perfect, exemplification. Be like Jesus, be like Muhammad. Let's see what he did. Move on. Believe in Allah, his messenger, peace be upon him. We say that because he's so holy every time we say peace be upon him. You have indeed been the messenger of Allah, peace be upon him. A peaceful pattern of conduct for any whose hope is in Allah or hope to meet Allah. Move on. Aisha, his wife, of 9 years old, Allah be pleased with her. Notice we changed the phrasing. Reported that Allah's apostle, peace be upon him, married her when she was 7 and slept with her when she was 9. Move on. Next slide, please. The messenger of Allah, and peace be upon him, said, one who died but did not fight for the way of Allah, nor did he express any desire or determination for jihad, died the death of a hypocrite. Now, I don't think it's very hard to prove that Muhammad is all about the Quran. Now, Muhammad did not write the Quran because he's illiterate. Yes, 25% of the world is calling their most holy, enlightened individual an illiterate. Now, I lived in the black neighborhoods, and I lived with illiterates in India, and I never ran into any of them that reminded me of anything holy or enlightened. Now, Aisha, his daughter's doing the narrating. His daughter. Again, he's, 40 years older than she is. And so, she's doing the narrating, writing this stuff down because he can't even write. He struck her and caused her pain. They're naming 7.5 million, 150 million people around the world are being named after this man. Is that a logical explanation for the other things I just described? That's a logical explanation for why they're getting the characteristics of this man in all of their countries. Dictatorships that never end. We don't hear happening in Uzbekistan because we're not involved there. But they're now revitalizing child bride capturing because it's their cultural trend. Next slide. Aisha said, Muhammad, you have made us as the equal to the dogs and the asses. So are we going to take my opinion, Mitch's opinion, or should we go with Muhammad's wife's opinion? I don't think it's a hard question to ask. Next one. Do not beat your wife as you beat your slave girl. Now, I love that we're modifying the beating. Now, that's really good. I have to admit, I give one to Mohammed here. This is a very good point. And I've heard other people talking about you don't beat a wife the way you would beat a child, just knocking them about. So it's really nice, ladies, right? I mean, you thought you had misogyny in this country. We're sanctioning the type of beating. And none of my friends, I've talked to so many Muslim friends. I argue with them in their face, and none of them will deny that he sanctioned this. They say, oh, you don't understand how the beating works. It's only a certain type of beating, not like, bruising and this. Do they have any idea what a relationship is? Do they have any idea? Can we move on? All right, so now Ali. We've heard that name. We probably have no idea who he is. Now we know why he's such a good fighter. He's named after a person who's also been beating another girl. Can we move on? Aisha said, I have not seen any women suffering as the believing women. And we're talking about living among pagans, idol worshippers. That's where I came from, India. That's a pretty low blow. India is the 8th most terrorist attacked country in the world. You probably didn't know that. 24th in the world, most least peaceful place in the world. That's a pretty low blow. Prophet said, I looked at hell and saw that the majority of its inhabitants were women. How is he going to get all those virgins in heaven? He literally doesn't understand math. I know, it's hard. It's so funny. It really is funny. Let me move on. The punishment. Now, some people tell me, oh no, ISIS is doing the wrong thing. There's no jihad. They're taking things out of context. He doesn't mince words, folks. He doesn't mince words. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah is to be murdered, crucified, hands cut off on opposite sides. Please YouTube this. They're doing it right now, cutting off the hands that gets on the opposite sides. Crucified. And now, what I am here to talk about is not the people who call this dear and sacred and correct. I am here to talk about the peaceful majority who sit passively back and let this stuff happen. Okay? All the people in our country here that call themselves Muslims call Muhammad sacred and right and believe that he is the only way to conduct life according to the will of Allah. Thank you.
Well, after that unexpected opening statement, we will now proceed into a rebuttal period in which the motion will first have 7 minutes to be able to react.
So guys, I had this nice little fancy academic argument typed up for my rebuttal, but I don't think that's going to do in response to fear-mongering. I don't believe the best way to convince you in a post-fact world with more numbers. So one thing that I want to focus on today is that you just saw a presentation where he only quoted the Quran once. Every other quotation on that screen was from a collection of sayings called the Hadith. They were written 200, 300 years after Muhammad lived. And he's calling this the authoritative word of Aisha, the 9-year-old girl that someone 200 years later said that he slept with Muhammad. Now, if you read the Quran itself, these things are not attributed to Muhammad, 200 years prior. But these things, just like we have the apocryphal tradition in Christianity between the Old and the New Testament, and then the Epistle of Barnabas and the Gospel of Thomas, these things are simply not witnessed to in the Quran itself. He had these nice citations on the screen. But one thing I want to focus in, he said they a lot. I want you guys to think about what it means when you think about the world in us versus them categories. They follow Muhammad. They follow this guy that someone 200 years after he lived said he slept with a 9-year-old girl. Can you imagine what that means? What that means when you think about other people? when you think about whether or not they're your equal, whether or not you think that they are able to live among us. He says, I'm not here to say that they shouldn't live in America. It's because I love them that they shouldn't be in America. Really, that's the truth. It's because I think they are my equal, but they follow Mohammed, and so that's incompatible with living in America. And I don't know about you, but on the statue of the United States of America, at the Statue of Liberty, it says, "Give me your tired. Give me your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." It sounds like this quote only really applies if there's an asterisk following it, as long as they don't identify as Islam. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm uncomfortable with polishing up a nice journey of doing things in the name of Jesus, and then what I consider to be a violation of the second commandment in the Old Testament, to use the Lord's name in vain. To say that you're going in the name of Christ to help people, and then in the same breath express their inferiority because of their beliefs. That is not the way that God wants us to view the world. It's not the way that we're supposed to live as followers of Christ. Now, beyond this point, there are a few things that need to be said just in general about a presentation, not even addressing the fact that Sharia law, the way that he seems to be quoting these passages, requires the unilateral, he thinks it's very straightforward. He thinks that Sharia law means that if there's a passage in the Hadith written 200 years after Muhammad lived, that is somehow representative of Islam. They have to take the needs of the contemporary context into consideration. We have 1.6 billion members of the Islamic faith, some of whom are in this room tonight. And you can say whatever you want, Jason, about the entirety of the Islamic faith, or if you only think it's represented by ISIS. But my one question to Jason this evening is if you believe that ISIS is interpreting the Quran correctly, that they, rather than my good friend Salem, who's joining me in the audience tonight, read the Bible better than he does, read the Quran better than Salem. I'll give you 10 seconds. Yes, allocate. Do you want to respond?
Oh, well, first of all, I never talked about Sharia law. I don't know why he's bringing up me talking about Sharia law. This is just so random. I talked about female gender mutilation, talked about so many other things that are not talking about law or even interpretation. It's coming back to character and role model. And as a psychologist and studying sociology, in the black neighborhood, so many things, you're looking at role models and how that role model shapes your people.
All right, so female genital mutilation. All right, you want to talk about that? How many of you know what circumcision is? Let's see some hands in the audience. Hey, you guys, you're with me. Okay, circumcision. Circumcision is where you take a male's genitals and you remove. Well, I'm not a scientist, so don't know the technical term. But he is suggesting that in Africa, in Africa, okay, where female genital mutilation is a problem, and I will never say that it's not, but they're also circumcising their children. Why do you think we circumcise, guys, all over the world, in Christian countries? But in the countries that he's quoting that have problems with female genital mutilation, they are majority Christian countries. Cameroon. We have problems in Nigeria. We have problems in, Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon. We have problems in Burkina Faso, Senegal, Christian countries. Some of them obviously have Islamic populations, but he's talking about a phenomenon that is unrelated to Islam. And he's trying to fearmonger you into believing that that is somehow okay to justify xenophobia, to justify the idea that Islam is incompatible with America. Now, when a guy who's trying to say that the Quran, the epitome of the Islamic faith is incompatible with living in America, you'd think that he would quote it more than once. What's the time? You would think that he would focus more time on the content of the Islamic faith, the 5 pillars of the faith, none of which mention what it means to be violent, genital mutilation. Do you see at the 5 pillars of faith, do you see anything that represents what Jason is trying to convey to you this evening? Do you see any of that? You can be charming, you can be funny, but when there are people's lives at stake, that is heartbreaking. So, I'm going to pass the floor over.
Okay, so first of all, we need to understand that Islam is not a people group. Please, let's get this through the head. Islam is not a people group. Islam is a political religious ideology. And so that is spreading around the world. There are either 40 to 20,000 people per year converting to Islam inside this country. I am not talking about people. Now, I will refer to Muslim-majority countries because it's a wonderful test group. It's a wonderful place to see where it's affecting the people. And he is completely incorrect about female genital mutilation. The majority of genital mutilation, FGM, happens inside Islamic countries. The countries with the highest rates are indeed Islamic countries. Indonesia, Egypt, and Ethiopia contain half of the world. Somalia has the highest rate of 98%. And there are 44 million girls that are being attacked, and it's happening inside of our country. And that's why this is pertinent to us. Because what are all of you going to do about protecting these girls? Now, he doesn't even know the difference between a foreskin and a clitoris. But unfortunately, and it probably made me why and I think that it's absolutely reprehensible that he would begin to compare male circumcision between what FGM is, which is removing the clitoris where she does not feel stimulation, and some of them will never be able to orgasm because of that. So his lack of biology, I was a pre-med student for a little while there. I know enough to know at least what we're talking about here. That's not the case. And no, I'm not talking about Sharia law. I'm talking about a whole people group saying, you saw what it means to be a Muslim. Allah is the only God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And then it went on to say very articulately that he is to be followed, he is the person of conduct. And then I went on to talk about the conduct that he's committed, which is a very logical explanation for what we're seeing in the world. And this does not mean that I don't want any Muslims to come into the country. Muslims are people. I love them. I have plenty of Muslim friends here as well. But the ideology is incompatible with us because it looks at women as so inferior. It looks at so many things the way America does not look at things. And that's what I'm here to talk about, so much more on the social and cultural and the way it's actually happening in the world. See, I lived this. He's talking about from textbooks, Sharia law and this and that. I want to see what is the outcome. How does it affect the people? Because that's what I care about. And there's no fear-mongering. I'm very passionate about abuse. I'm very passionate about girls being damaged. And so I really want to make that clear. And we have to go on to understand that he cannot rebuttal the statement that says to be a Muslim is to call Muhammad correct in all that he did. That will be irrefutable. And that is the problem we have. It's a very simple paradox, simple argument. To be a Muslim, you must agree with Muhammad that he is Allah's prophet. And then you're going to follow him. So how can you get out of that? Do you understand that? It's not a hard argument. And then going back, a lot of trouble he had with understanding Old Testament and the Quran, we need to understand that they're both Abrahamic religions. They both go back to Jesus. So everything going back from Jesus on backwards is all the same. So when he's comparing, this text and that text, I'm like, you might as well compare translations. It means nothing to me. The fundamental factor here is, at Jesus, the Jews and everybody else followed him and said, he is the role model. His character is what we should imitate. And he was the first person in history to extend equality to a female. For example, the woman at the well. And so many other examples where he broke down all of these things and nullified all of those texts that he was referring to in the Old Testament. And we follow him. And we all know that. And then on the dire contrast, we have the opposite direction of Muhammad taking them down this tyrannical road, and I have 14 pages more of those same texts, and we can keep going through that. I can go all night. There's over 109 times that they're commanded to commit jihad, and endless times about the abuse with women. So, no, I can go all night, guys, if you want to talk about the marvelous texts of the Quran. And one thing that may help us in context is we often look at our history alone, and we don't realize the Islamic nations, mainly Saudi Arabia, has been warring jihad, holy war, which is very articulate in saying it's not holy war unless it is not for your own earthly gain, i.e. for land or for water or what have you. There's countless times where Muhammad is commanding, of course through the voice of Allah, to chase them down and keep getting them. It's not about battles, not about being fighting. It is a holy war of chasing people down and doing this. Now, of course, you would say, well, why aren't everybody doing this, Jason? Well, who wants to? It's a whole lot easier to eat dates. I mean, do you have any idea how good Iranian dates are? I could get Iranian dates in India, and they're nothing like the ones you get in this country. So, yeah, I'm going to sit around and eat dates because it's a hell of a lot more enjoyable than running around trying to behead people. So just because they're not doing it does not mean that they do not condone it. And I have statistics that show that 60% of Muslims around the world will not condemn Al-Qaeda and Hamas. And that is the question I pose to all of you. When you have your Muslim friend, is ask him, will you condemn Al-Qaeda and Hamas unequivocally? Now, some of these groups have said, we are not here, we are so happy for the state of Israel, because it has gathered all the Jews to this land that we might kill them here and not have to hunt them down around the world. There's Hamas for you. And more than the majority, as he's claiming, will not condemn them. 25% of the people polled will not comment. And these people are in our countries. I can give you endless statistics on the polls done in this countries where they will not condemn. They're not outdoing it, but they will not condemn it. And so that is a very, very big problem that we have. And that's why I say it's incompatible. We have American-born people, white people, black people. It's not about race. It's not about xenophobia, as he's trying to frame me with hate. I am here to talk about an ideology that is permeating our minds. 250 American citizens have joined ISIS in the Middle East. So we're here to talk about an ideology and how it's affecting people in our country. 500,000 girls are being at risk for mutilation in our country. And what are we going to do about that?
So next we have a question that we actually pose directly towards Jason, the opposition. You have 2 minutes to speak on this question. Jason, I want to ask you a straightforward question. Do you believe that ISIS interprets the Quran, generally speaking, the way in which it is supposed to be read? In other words, do you believe that the true Islamic faith necessarily entails violence?
The true Islamic faith entails violence because of the sexual life laid out for Muhammad, where he had 9 wives sleeping with them, all in the same way, allegedly the sexual stam limit of 30 men. And when you have women that are completely oppressed and being abused like that, you're going to get violence. And that's why we see so much violence coming out of underprivileged neighborhoods. So the product of people being suicidal is very much coming from abuse. When I look at jihadists, I see hurting young men that are shamed and looking for honor. I don't see evil, wicked people that I want to kill. And so I look at the root cause. I don't sit here and say, oh, they must have watched a radicalizing video. Could I show one of you a radicalizing video and the next thing you're going to be out enjoying cutting off a young woman's head with a paring knife? So I'm looking at what are the prerequisites that built up this culture, built up this ideology to function that way. So I think it's very important to understand that.
Could you confirm whether you would say yes or no to whether or not.
Oh, it's the only way. Oh, is ISIS the only way? I would say that ISIS is undoubtedly correctly following Muhammad on many of the things they are doing. Now, they may not be taking as many wives as he did. They may want to up their ante, but I haven't calculated it. But there are plenty of other ways to interpret it. Like you said, it's a very old text. And one of the problems, there is so much ambiguity in Islam, is they have ambiguity on the texts. One of the reasons the Shiites and the Sunnis are fighting is because they don't all call the same text valid. So the hadith that he was trying to downcredit is very much valid. I am using Sunni hadith, which is the majority of Muslims are following Sunni tradition. So it's very much valid, and yeah, they're doing it, but I'm not going to say that's the only way it has to be interpreted.
So you believe that believing in the Islamic faith necessarily entails violence, yes or no?
Absolutely.
Okay. We have a response from Mitch for 30 seconds.
Yeah, a couple things, guys. First thing, he calls them jihadists. He called an entire faith jihadists. He also didn't call them a faith at all. He called them an ideology. So those two factors are really important as you evaluate his very, very scary answer. But because he answered yes, I just need to say how much that response breaks my heart. I have no idea how someone can come to that conclusion when they know what the logic of Sharia law entails. You take the interests of the community into consideration. You do not just read a hadith written 200 years after Muhammad lived in order to follow a guy who slept with a 9-year-old girl, supposedly.
All right, now, a question for the motion, which is for Mitch. During Jason's presentation, he mentioned how criticism of Muhammad is not something Muslims are encouraged to do. But according to Jason, the Quran mentions Muhammad sleeping with a child, commands Muslims to kill Jews, and permits men beating their wives. Based upon this information, is it possible for American Muslims to appeal to Muhammad as a role model?
Well, short answer is I'm going to say that, yet again, the Quran is not about the Prophet Muhammad. He's mentioned by name 4 times. Jesus is mentioned by name 25 times. The Quran is about faithful obedience to Allah. So my point 1, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, Jason seems to be lacking an understanding of the role of Muhammad in the Islamic faith. Yes, they venerate him as an important figure, but the texts that he quotes about Muhammad are not coming from the Quran itself. So to answer the one part is that the Quran does not mention Muhammad sleeping with a child, as he seems to have indicated to you all today. Second, the Quran commands Muslims to kill Jews. Yes, the Bible commands Jews to kill a whole bunch of people. God in the conquest narratives, violating and killing innocent women and children. So point 2, I want to be clear that I'm not here to defend Muhammad. I'm a Trinitarian Christian who believes in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Even if Muhammad did all of those horrific things that conspiracy theorists' websites say that Jason has been quoting, because I have the sources, the Quran's focus is elsewhere. Jason can attack Muhammad all he wants, but that doesn't make his logic sound. 3, does the Quran mention Muhammad sleeping with a child? No. You can take it up with the scholars who are on the internet talking in talk forums about these things, but honestly, it's a terrible, intellectually dishonest thing to tell you that Islam is about following a man who slept with a 9-year-old child. I will give you the Quran, and I will allot the rest of my time for you to find the passage in the Quran where Muhammad slept with a child.
All right, thank you. You have 40 seconds, because he didn't use 10, to respond to what Mitch just said.
Okay, so it doesn't really matter to me whether the Quran said it or the Hadith said it. What matters to me is what the practitioners of the text claim. And I've never yet met a Muslim who will deny the Hadith. And I would love that. I would say, hallelujah, let's burn that thing off and move on. I would love for them to say that. But they say, no, absolutely, he slept with this girl, and that's not a problem. We need to understand the Parliament of Yemen voted unanimously down to a bill in Yemen that tried to raise the legal limit of marriage to 16. It still remains at 0. So these girls that you've seen, there was a girl just recently who bled to death from her marriage night. That was 8 years old. So that's what we're having to deal with, is they're following him.
Thank you. Now, a question for both of you. According to the data compiled by Mother Jones Magazine, which looked at mass shootings in the United States since 1982, white men, who constitute 62% of America's population, committed some 64% of the shootings. Muslims, on the other hand, who account for 2% of the American population, committed just 0.5% of all mass shootings. Based upon this information, who poses a greater threat to American lives, Muslim Americans or white men? The opposition has 2 minutes.
Okay, this is really enjoyable. First of all, I don't know that Mother Jones is the source of this misinformation, or whether the person who quoted this is incorrect. First of all, white males don't constitute 62% of our population. If they did, you would add in the females and then get 124%. So I think the first thing we need to talk about is false information, Mitch. So, yes, very good point. We noted. Now, what this is doing is it's trying to compare from 1982. Why don't you go back to 1772? What it's doing is it's skewing the information because it's looking like they're equals. Of course, in 1982, we know that the white population was not 62%, and we know the Muslim population was not 2%. So it's not giving a fair ratio comparison of those two rates moving forward. Now, what we do know is they're not just using guns. And frankly, I don't care how they're killing people, whether we're driving people over here with Hyundais, or running people with trucks, or blowing them with bombs. I don't care. We need to talk about the number of people that are being killed, and most importantly, who is on the rise. And why lone wolves are very, very different from this is because it's an ideology. And that's what I'm here to fight. I'm here to fight an ideology that says jihad is acceptable in circumstances. There is no ideology in the U.S. that is fostering the lone wolf attacks. And that's what's completely different about the whole thing. So we may get someone who's horribly evil and brutal and racist and what have you and does horrible things. I completely unequivocally condemn that. But we're talking about an ideology because it propagates. We're talking about children watching this stuff and following it. My name is Mohammed. What did Mohammed do? Well, I should act like Mohammed. And that's what we're dealing with. And then talking about crime in Muslims, Muslims represent themselves in pretty much all Western states to a 10 times to their population in prison. There is 10 times their ratio. So if they're 1% in the population like they are in this country according to Pew Research, they're 10% of the people incarcerated.
Please round up.
I'm rounding up.
Mitch, 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, it is 64% of white men who commit violent crime. It's not 62% of the male population. They are even less than that. So Jason is correct that white men do, in fact, constitute less than half of the population in America, but they commit some 64% of the mass shootings. He calls them very creatively lone wolves. But unlike the Muslim jihadists, as he likes to refer to them, he believes that there's a deep-rooted ideology inspiring their attacks. And I just don't see why he cannot make the connection that there is a fundamental way in which we set up society in America where we refer to white men who commit mass shootings as mentally unstable, but we refer to Muslims as terrorists. Why are we able to draw a distinction on that point simply based on the color of their skin? So, I only have a little bit of time left, but I want to make a couple more points regarding statistics. In 2015, more people were shot by their own child with their own gun than by terrorists in the United States of America. Toddlers with guns kill more people than terrorists in this country. I could be wrong, but unless the opposition's argument rests upon the idea that Islam is incompatible, necessarily requiring that toddlers are incompatible with this country, I just don't see the logic. This flaw is something that we also need to recognize when you see that since 2005, Americans were more likely to be killed by a lightning strike than by a terrorist. We always used those odds as a purely hypothetical scenario, trying to expose irrational fears and fear-mongering, and yet here we are having to even ask the question, as if our Muslim brothers and sisters are able to live amongst us and practice their faith, which he calls an ideology. I'm rounded up.
Would you like some more rebuttal? No, I don't think so. Again, we have another question for both of you that each of you will have 2 minutes to answer. The first one is for the motion. In the past 8 years of the Obama presidency, the United States bombed the Muslim majority countries in the Middle East every 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes. Do you believe that American foreign policy has any role to play in causing unrest in the region? In other words, do you believe American foreign policy contributes in any way to radicalization of members of the Islamic faith?
Thank you, John, for that question. I think intellectual honesty requires that we step back and take this broader approach to understanding world history in a broader perspective. American foreign policy has not been the greatest. History is not going to be too kind to us. From the establishment of the modern state of Israel in 1948, immediately creating conflict with the Palestinian peoples, some of which include Christians, some of which include Muslims, we've significantly shaped the life in the Middle East. Then there were the oil conflicts in the 1960s. We come in and we oust dictators, and we oust democratically elected leaders, and then we put in dictators that we choose. And we ask ourselves, why is there unrest in the Middle East? And then we have the Gulf War with the first Bush in the late 80s, early 90s. And then we have Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003. And we're dropping 26,000 bombs every single year on 7 Muslim-majority countries. That's 70 bombs per day, a bomb every 20 minutes. 90% of all drone strikes kill civilian targets rather than their intended target. And much of our foreign policy is simply based on making money with oil. Combined with the fact that our CIA was the first to create the Taliban during the Cold War, during tensions with Russia, I believe it's not only possible, but necessary to say that the U.S. is not innocent in all of this. In fact, many of you will find this interesting. Even Donald Trump's former national security advisor, Mike Flynn, declared in 2015 that there would be no ISIS, no radicalized Islam, the way that we currently see it, without the U.S. invasion of the Middle East in 2003. This isn't a Democrat. This is the former advisor to Donald Trump. Flynn went on to mention how the U.S. drone program makes more terrorists than it kills. In his own words, when you drop a bomb from a drone, you're causing more damage than you're causing good. And I think that there should be a different approach. Imagine a 16-year-old kid in war-torn Syria watching his mother and his sister die from a U.S. bomb. He has 2 options. Try to flee and become a refugee, but hey, he's not welcome here. Then, on top of that, ISIS tries to kill those who do flee. The other option is that he turns to ISIS for food and security. To be clear, I'm not in any way condoning ISIS, but I want us to develop a moral compass which understands that the U.S. is not free from blame.
Please run up.
History will not be kind to America's foreign policy.
And it's in 2 minutes.
According to him, history may not be kind to American policy, but whose policy it's really not going to be kind to is the Arab states. The Arab states, we have to understand, people didn't sign up to speak Arabic. Arabic is in, I think, about 20 countries, about 50 countries are Islamic today, and we're talking about some of the worst conquest we've ever seen. It just completely makes Western colonization look like nothing, because we're talking about 1,400 years of conquest. The colonization is 200 to 400 years long. Now, some people put the numbers high as 270 million people being killed by the time Islam was pushed to the Himalaya mountains to conquering Spain. And now certainly it does affect the people in hating America when America's dropping bombs, the people they call their brothers. But if they were really their brothers, Why is Saudi Arabia not helping Somalia, as it now is such a corrupt state due to the United Courts of Islam that run the country, making it so corrupt that people are now dying? So to say that it really is some kind of a homogenous brotherhood is definitely a false statement. There is not cohesive agreement among the Arab states. Many of them hate each other. And now, speaking of causing conflicts in Israel, no. The safest Palestinians in the world are the ones inside Israeli soil. What we don't talk about is the masses of Palestinians that were slaughtered in Lebanon, in Syria, and Jordan, and so many other places. So the reason they're living there, rather than going and living with their brothers, is because Israel has the safest, it is the safest place in the Middle East and the only democracy.
Finished?
Sure.
All right, we have now a time of rebuttal, so you have 2 minutes.
I promised you that there would be alternative facts this evening, and that is one of them. One thing. Jason has been very keen this evening on mentioning jihad, and they're waging a holy war. But I'm going to read to you from the Quran itself a passage about Muslims' attitude toward unbelievers. 6 verses. O ye that reject faith, I worship not that which ye worship, nor will we worship that which I worship. And I will not worship that which ye have been wont to worship, nor will ye worship that which I worship. To you be your own way, and to me be mine. Mm-hmm. Amen. That is exactly the answer to this evening's question. To you be your own faith, and to me be mine. He's not calling for the killing of unbelievers. No matter how much he propagates without quoting the Quran itself, it's a specific historical context, 1400 years ago. And I think we have a specific historical context 3,000 years ago in our own Old Testament. We do not adhere to those same views of the world. Just as be careful. A majority of the Islamic faith across this country and across the world, 1.6 billion people, unequivocally reject ISIS. There was a 1 million Muslim march against ISIS in Great Britain, but you're not going to see that on the news when we have fear-mongers propagating this idea that they're incompatible with us. It sells advertisements, it makes money, but it's not true. Remember that.
You done? Yes. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. 42% of Muslims in France believe suicide bombing are justified. So when he starts going off about these people don't condone this stuff, it is a lie. It is a lie. And here's why it's a lie, because I look at what is happening. If it really was 7% or 25% of these radicals, the majority would do what a majority does, and it would control them, and it would dominate them, and it would crush them out if they were against it. It doesn't take a lot of common sense to realize that if you have a country of 100 million people and 15% start condoning something, the 85% would control that. So it has to do with the complacency, and this is something I want to talk about. We use the word peaceful majority, and I learned something when I was in India. I had a very dear friend named Mohammed, and I realized that he would never wage jihad against me. From that, you just know. You know something about a friend. And with that same conviction, I felt that he would not intervene or inform me if someone else would. And I had an epiphany at that moment. I realized that Dr. Martin Luther King was not given a Nobel Apathy Prize. He was given a Nobel Peace Prize for stepping into a violent zone and creating shalom, which is reconciliation. And that's when I realized that there is an apathetic majority that will sit complacency in the world's richest states, while the men they call their brothers are killed and bombed by millions. So to call them a peaceful majority, as they sit apathetically and watch them die, is indeed a misusage of the words.
Thank you. You have 1 minute if you would like to respond.
So I'm going to be quick. There are 5,000 honor killings by members of the Islamic faith in the entire world every single year. There are 12,000 homicides in America every year. 12,000 compared to 5,000 at the most. He's going to sort 8,000 because I have his source as well. So I want to focus on that for one moment. But he said that France, 42% of Muslims in France support suicide bombings. But we had to switch statistics before we prepared for this debate tonight, and I actually got to look at the survey, and that question is actually incorrect. Many people in this room believe that military use when you're under attack is justified. Many of you, hardly any, react to the drone programs in protest. But in France, Muslims believe 23% of the time that bombings are rarely justified. He made it sound in a very intentionally misleading way that 42% of Muslims in France are in support of suicide bombing. And that is intellectually dishonest, it's misleading, and it's false.
Thank you. You have 1 minute if you'd like to respond.
Oh, I can just keep on. We got all night here, man. 45% of British Muslims agree that clerics preach violence in the West represents mainstream. This is Pew Research. We have so many things where they're all condoning the violence. For example, Hezbollah receives positive ratings in Jordan where 55% of Muslims are favorable with view. 57% of Muslims worldwide approve of Al-Qaeda. Like, we can go and go and go on this. So to say that it's just an isolated thing is just a completely an understatement.
You're rounding up?
Sure.
All right. Thank you. We will now proceed on into audience Q&A. And we'll pull up a slide that you could either write your question, if you've already got a question, you write it down on your card, on your piece of paper, and either pass them on to like one of the sides for the aisles for someone to pick them up on the floor, or by hand, or you can just easily go up to this website in which you can even upvote anonymously. You can upvote which question you would like to see asked. If there's anyone who would like to ask a question, and by raising their hand, they can do so as well. Alex Reinhold, you're recognized.
Can we actually answer the question that was asked tonight? Is Islam pursuing religion acceptable in or compatible with the United States culture?
For Mitch or for Jason?
Either one. You haven't heard your argument on either side.
Well, I don't know where you've been. I've been articulating where I thought was articulating the outcome of what we're seeing among the Islamic world being tied to the ideology of Islam. The reason I say ideology is not to discredit as a religion. It's to open it up to include that it's also a political system. Because a lot of you don't understand that. So I just wanted to open up. I'm not trying to discredit it as a religion. But no, this religion is obviously incompatible for many reasons. For example, they don't condone homosexuality as a marriage. Well, this country does. So I would agree with Islam on that case, perhaps, but it's not compatible. So I'm not even going to talk about everything that it doesn't condemn. They don't agree with abortion. They don't agree with pornography. They don't agree with so many other things in this country that we endorse and allow. And so to me, it's unequivocally incompatible, and we see them creating narrow communities to avoid being intermixed with us.
Mitch, would you like to respond?
Yeah. Yes, Islam is compatible with the culture and values of the United States. To say otherwise, I'm afraid, is to lapse into some really, really dark places, both with our own view of the world, but also with our view of other people. To assume that we can say no on that point when they constitute 1.6 billion people in the world, a quarter of the world's population. Jason says that they follow a man who slept with a child. Christians follow a guy who died. I don't see, in my opinion, Jason, the logic and consistency in your argument in declaring that Muhammad is a role model for Islam. He's mentioned 4 times in the Quran.
Who wrote the Quran?
According to your logic, Muhammad was an illiterate.
No, you.
I am responding to this question, Jason. No interruptions, please. So, I would like to answer your question and focus on your question. To say that the 3.3 million Americans in this country are incompatible with our values if they practice their faith. The logic that he used in order to prove that was that they don't believe in gay marriage. Well, I bet you a lot of Christians don't believe in gay marriage, so does that mean we're incompatible with this country? And it's on that point that you must remember. It's not a question as if we agree with every single thing of a religion. The point is whether we can live peacefully. And because they constitute only 1% of the population, but only commit 0.5% of mass shootings, and because they're 2% of the country's doctors, you're more likely to be saved by a Muslim when your toddler shoots you than you are to be killed by one.
If there's no other questions.
So, Mitch,
Yeah.
you said on more than one occasion that the community must be taken into consideration when referring to Sharia law.
Yes.
This presents that all members of a Muslim community are in complete agreement with complete equality in making this decision. However, in many Muslim communities and countries, women are not represented equally and are not treated equally. Since Sharia law is seen as culturally acceptable for Muslims, how does that compare to what is culturally acceptable in America? That is, how does the equality of women to men, or at least the strive for equality of women to men, compare between America and these Muslim communities around the world, and how would they mix?
Yeah. We are only 50 years removed from the civil rights movement. It was, 160 years ago when we had the Civil War? The Earth has existed for 4 billion years. And we think that we're advanced when we have been removed 50 years, when we still have racial problems, when we still have a gender gap problem. He's arguing as though women are treated really great in this country, and they're not.
I'm saying that is in comparison to these Muslim communities.
In comparison?
Yes.
I would absolutely, unequivocally agree that in some ways America has a better attitude towards women than certain countries. You know, there are problems with Saudi Arabia and women driving. There are problems in Iran. But those are two countries. Turkey, for instance, is a Muslim-majority country. They've had 4 female heads of state. How many has the United States had? Indonesia, Muslim-majority country. They too, actually it's the largest Muslim-majority country in the world, but they do not have all of these problems that Jason seems to be accusing the entirety of the faith of. Even if he's not saying that it's everyone, he calls them they. He calls them jihadists. Yes, we are a little bit more developed, but in the course of 4 billion years, it's not that much.
Turkish women are 10 times more likely to receive domestic violence than women in the EU. And in Indonesia, they constitute the majority of women who are female gender mutilated. So it's really nice to understand what's happening in the world. Would you rather have a female head of state or be 10 times more likely to be abused by men? So we need to get the facts straight.
Is that Michael?
The question, please. Yeah.
Well, let's have audience hands then.
Okay. So far, everything you have said, and Mitch I mentioned this, so I want to ask this to you. Everything that you have said it can be attributed to Christians through history, and not even through history, but also here and right now, and even in America with those lone wolves that sometimes are doing it in the name of God, like the shooter at Planned Parenthood in California, or even if we look at the Westboro Baptist Church and those small or Ku Klux Klan and all these Christian hate groups. So tell me, how is Christianity more compatible than Islam if we can attribute these horrible things to small groups of people that follow this religion?
Well, that's what I've been talking about, is my problem with Islam is not about the small groups. I think I've made that multiple times clear, that there's abuses in the family structure going on is irrelevant to the small groups. And I love that question. Is Ku Klux Klan to Christianity what jihad is to Muslims? No, it's completely not. Because the vast majority of Christians will unequivocally condemn the Ku Klux Klan, and there is absolutely no validity in any text to be racially biased according to the life of Jesus Christ, which is how we interpret our text. So no, there's no validity in doing that. Versus in Islam, The majority does not condemn jihad. The text does support jihad, and their icon, which Mitch refuses to recognize as the writer of the Quran, is embracing, his life did indeed embrace those very racist and xenophobic actions.
I'm going to respond.
Mitch can respond first.
Okay. All right, so one thing, Mike, I'm just going to talk. All right, guys? The Roman Empire is predominantly throughout world history a Christian empire, starting in 325 with Constantine, with the Edict of Milan in 313, making Christianity the empire, or the religion of the empire. Now, one thing that is characteristic of the Roman Empire that you're not going to see in the Ottoman Empire, which is a Muslim majority empire, is that the Roman Empire made their constituents convert to Christianity. But the Ottoman Empire, that had a great deal of space throughout the Middle East, Africa, and even into Spain, what you see with them is that there are some of the earliest churches that still exist. They did not forcibly convert all of their constituents to Islam. Why are there churches from the earliest 100 years of the Christian church that still exist in Muslim-majority countries, but whereas when it's the Roman Empire, we're the ones who are converting everyone forcefully into Christianity? Why is it that Allah, in the Quran, Muhammad says, I will worship my way and you will worship your way, but when it's Rome and Caesar, it's you will worship our way. Why is it that way? Why do we fail to see that there's a broader and longer history of Christian injustice in this world, of which I'm a part and of which I must continually repent? He's in disagreement with that. There's a broader and longer sustained history of Christians in this world that have done injustices in the name of God. The Crusades, the Inquisition, you have things all over the place. And yet, we only isolate one faith that's predominantly Arabic that doesn't look like us. And that's Harvard.
Jason has 30 seconds to respond if you'd like to.
Again, he's trying to frame me out to be xenophobic. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the ideology and how it's supported. And no, first of all, when we look at the golden age of Islam, when they were all living together in what he claims to be peaceful, no. You have the jizya, which is a tax that is imposed, and there's all kinds of inequalities about how you treat people who are not Muslim throughout things, making them not as friends. They cannot be friends with them. They're forced to make them always greet the Muslim first, force them into the narrowest side of the road. Endless things about inequality in that glowing equality he was talking about.
All right, we'll take a question from Professor Amundsen.
I'm married to a historian, so I'm going to try and frame this in a little bit of historical context. I'm really curious what your take is, if you think that the conversation you're having here tonight is really, truly, at its root core, anything substantively different than the "are Catholics bad" for the United States arguments that we had through the early 19th century. All the way up to when John Kennedy ran for president in 1960, he had to swear, oh, I'm not going to be loyal to the Pope, I'll actually serve this nation. And that's how long the anti-Catholic hysteria went. Anti-Catholic riots related to the 20s in this nation, because they were bad for us. So, either we see any substantive, corollaries or mass differences or between what we've been through in the past. The other is to be feared versus what we're going through right now.
Starting to me?
Either of you.
Well, I think that undoubtedly we have problems with the Catholic Church. A lot of people that founded this country left because of persecution, so they definitely had a reason to want to leave it and no longer be in that conflict. But the ideologies of the Catholic Church may not be as much of an opposition as, per se, Islam. And the value system and family structure of the Catholic Church compared to the Protestant Church would undoubtedly be much more similar.
Not very content with that answer. It seems like he's reiterating your concerns with anti-Catholic hysteria. One thing, I spoofed earlier, guys. I forgot what a foreskin was. But Jason just said that this country was started in contrast to the Catholic Church. It was actually the Church of England, which is a distinct denomination in and of itself, that was the prime target of why in this country, in America, we are able to say that we believe in religious tolerance. There is no authoritarian declaration of what faith you must have, what you must believe. And so I absolutely agree that this is essentially the same concept. We demonize Jews. We demonize the Japanese during World War II. We demonize African Americans. Now we're demonizing people south of the border, and we're going to put up a nice wall right there to protect us from them. And we demonize Muslims. It's the exact same question. It is always that question. Are we going to accept the fact that someone who is different than us, someone who sees the world differently than we do, is legitimate in their own right? Not that they're always right, but that they deserve to exist as they are, whether they're Catholics, Jews, African Americans, Mexicans, Muslims. To say that it is incompatible with this country is incompatible with not only the Christian faith, but also the American value that we're the land of the free, and we have no religious authority and laws. Go.
Are there any questions in the website that were uploaded? Oh, it didn't work. Okay. Well, see you.
This is a question for Mitch.
Okay.
So would you say that there are any ideas or beliefs that are incompatible with American values?
Alright, so obviously I want you all to vote yes tonight, but I think Christianity is fundamentally at odds with American values. I believe a religion that follows someone who is crucified by the presiding government has a lot of tensions with the country that calls itself the greatest and the best in all the world. America first. I think Christianity is inconsistent with American values. But if you believe, like I do, that Christians can live in this country counterculturally, that we can follow the third way of Jesus, then of course, Christianity is compatible with America. That being said, it seems that I could have heard everything wrong tonight. You know, I said he has to prove that ISIS is the one who interprets the Quran better than the majority of Muslims across the world, and that the logic of Sharia is in some way bound up with the way that ISIS views things. But honestly, I didn't hear him say that. I did not hear an unequivocal argument that some way, somehow, ISIS interprets the Quran correctly. What he showed you is that ISIS draws upon hadith, authoritatively inferior texts written hundreds of years later that are unrelated to the Christian faith. So coming back to your question with the Islamic faith, can you give me a follow-up briefly?
So it seems that there is a difference between the way we're defining Islam in the context of this debate. So you are saying people who believe various things that may or may not be in accord with American culture are free to come here. Whereas Jason is saying there is a set of beliefs that is opposed to American values. So I don't understand why you're debating, because I believe that you're actually talking at somebody who isn't there. You're talking to people that aren't, neither of you oppose the direct assertion of what Islam is. Okay? So
We never oppose. I would like to think that Jason did oppose Islam being compatible with America. Right?
but you didn't make the difference between whether Islam was a belief, an ideology, a religion, whatever you want to call it, an idea, or whether it was a group of people that happened to hold these beliefs.
Right.
And so that's the difference right there.
Do you believe that a concept, what Jason refers to as an ideology, this third thing hanging in the air, is more determinative of the way that individuals act than... So that's kind of the question. You nailed it right on the head. Is the third thing incompatible with America? Or is the third thing only the overflow of individual and collective Muslims practicing their faith together in peace, committing less crimes by percentage than white men in this country? It's about people. This is not about an idea. If you say that Islam as an idea is incompatible with this country, it's really not saying anything at all. But what it is saying is that members of the Islamic faith are not welcome here. You're saying not just that you prefer Christianity to Islam, you're not just saying that you prefer living in America rather than the Middle East. What you are saying is that the 3.3 million Muslims in this country are not welcome here. You're saying that the Muslim students on campus are not welcome here. And that is what you mean when you say Islam is incompatible with America.
Jason, would you like to respond?
No, we can have any belief we want. We're allowed to have neo-Nazis in this country. We have throngs of them. There was a couple of neo-Nazis who just ate their neighbor recently. And that is precisely why I unequivocally condemn the ideology of the Nazi regime. So it has nothing to do with people and everything to do with an ideology. It is the religion, very articulately defined by me as following the Prophet Mohammed. As I said, there's 7.5 million people named this last year Mohammed, fastest growing name in the world. And yes, we have to look at whether they are going to be enjoying this country. And I say that honestly. We have somebody who does not like democracy. They shouldn't be here. And there's people living here that don't like it. And they may be white, they may be black, they may be anybody. And I find it painful for them because I live in a country, in a political system that I didn't appreciate at times. You know, I was investigated by I was investigated for being there. I couldn't even do what I wanted to do. And so I didn't like that, so I left. But no, it has nothing to do with the race. Let me be very articulate to say they can have any belief they want. But to practice Islam, to practice the ideology, is going to run a risk with what we're doing in this country.
Any more questions?
Thanks.
I have a question for you, Mitch. You said that the opposition to this evidence was invalid, especially from the beginning, because it came from the Hadith and not the Quran.
Right.
However, the 5 pillars, which all Muslims agree to, are only found in the Hadith. How can you reject the very same text that all Muslims agree?
Hey, that's a great question. So we need to go back and remember what is Sharia law. All right. So when Christianity describes itself, we have certain aspects. You know, if you're a Calvinist, there are the 5 points of Calvinism. All right. Okay. We have these 5 points. It's a way that you articulate it. Those things aren't found in the Bible. Just like these 5 pillars, I made a point to mention that the 5 pillars are not what Muslims go around talking about every day. It's only when you ask them. It's not this third thing that they're always thinking about. It's just in general, how can you talk about Islam? Faith, prayer, fasting, giving to the poor, and the Hajj. Now, just because the term 5 pillars of Islam is only found in the Hadith, that does not mean that all of those concepts are not also found in the Quran. You see what I'm saying? Those things are also there. Faith, prayer, fasting, giving to the poor. Those things are already in the Quran itself. So to say that somehow the Hadith become this authoritative concept that really was the entirety of Jason's proposal. Everything that he fear-mongered you with this evening was essentially quoting from the Quran, from the Hadith. But if you really understand what the Hadith are, there are sections. Islamic scholars there are 6 Hadith, 6 of them, all right? And in each Hadith, they categorize them by trustworthy, questionable, and not true. What Jason did not tell you today is that a lot of those quotations, obviously I don't have them memorized off the top of my head, would be considered by almost every Islamic scholar to be not true. The Hadith are organized by their validity based on Islamic scholarship. And to say somehow that you can quote one, put it on the screen, and scare you is really, it's intellectually dishonest.
Thank you. As Jason is about to put up his concluding statements, can we get the voting system up on the screen for you to already...
We'll do that.
After? All right, you can conclude. 2 minutes.
So firstly, microphones. Hello, microphones. So, no, ISIS is not following the Hadith. Let's be very, very clear. ISIS is not following the Hadith. That passage that I gave you about the cutting off the hands and all that is the Quran 533. Okay? And then we have, I just don't understand why this is so hard to get, Mitch. We have the whosoever does not believe in Allah and his messenger, we have prepared a place for the unbelievers. Like, that's as simple as it gets. That's what it means to be a Muslim. So we can't, that's Quran 48:13. So we can't move beyond that. We can't move beyond that. And so it doesn't matter about what the Hadith says. Some of it is contested. Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim are some of the least contested, and I purposely chose those because they are. So that all aside, what I want to say going forward is, as you encounter Muslims, we need to look at them as people that are obviously following the wrong guy. It's just that simple. They're following the wrong guy. It's not a good belief system. It has led them to be the most corrupt, impoverished, most damaged countries in the world. And that hurts me. And it hurts me that Islam is hurting so many people. And so I encourage you all to reach out all the more to these people. As I said, I've done so much with refugees in this country. I have a wide variety of them that I'm very close with. And I encourage you all to reach out to them, get to know them on the inside. Get to know them to where they tell you, yeah, I'm getting married and I'm marrying this younger girl, and yeah, she's female genitally mutilated, and that's the way I like it. That's how close I know some of my Muslim friends. So I encourage you to reach out in an unfearful way, in a loving way, in a relational way, and engage the whole world. And travel the world the way I have. I've done it with very little money. And experience all of these things and love the people and get inside their world. And the reason I speak with authority about these things is because I have been inside their world. I listen to what their value systems are, to them, how they think about these things. And so I encourage you all, stand up boldly for injustice. The last thing I would ever want to do is create fear. Are you now fear of someone genitally mutilating you? There's no fear in that. I'm not here to cause fear. I am here to stand up and be the voice for injustice. It is fundamental to us as believers. And that is what we're called to reach out and love everyone and not negate that there's ideologies, thoughts, thinking structures that are going to be in people that need to die. That are not good for them and not good for us, even as we hold thoughts and beliefs that are bad. And so that, to me, is what I want to see moving forward. It's not about xenophobia. It's not about shutting down immigration. But when I hear that 40 million Muslims are converting to Islam each year, some of these men mostly in prison, then some of them have become now pastors that are in prison, if you will, and then later get arrested for trying to smuggle in knives and scissors, as was in one case. So I don't think that it necessarily redeemed him from his thought about what he was doing.
Would you please round up?
So yeah, that's what I have to say. Thank you all for listening. I'm very thankful that you were all able to hear this, and I hope that you were able to understand my passion for justice and the love that I have for my friends of all colors and all languages around the world. Thank you.
All right. Now Mitch will do his conclusion.
I thought a lot about what I wanted to say in this moment. When I have a platform to be a voice for people who are often targeted by people outside of their own communities, to be a voice for those of marginalized and oppressed populations, not only in this country, but across the world. And for the life of me, I did not know what I was going to say. I'm not a great debater, and I'm not good on my feet. But one thing that did stick out to me as I was thinking about what I was going to say to you all tonight is that just, what does it mean if you vote no? That's the whole point. What does it mean if you vote no? What does it say about your character? What does it say about your thoughts? What does it say about your understanding of the world? And I said this a moment ago. I'm going to reiterate it. You're not just saying that you prefer to be a Christian rather than a Muslim. You're not just saying that you prefer to live in the United States of America rather than the Middle East. What you're saying is that the 3.3 million Muslims in this country and the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world aren't actually religious. They're an ideology. They're jihadists. They're a they, not an us. What you're saying is that they were not welcome, that the Muslim students on campus are not welcome here. A no vote is not just a preference, it is a definitive declaration that Islam is an other, not a religion, not a faith, not able to be practiced nonviolently with the beautiful logic of Sharia law that I do not follow. But I want to affirm that it is not always and unequivocally able to be interpreted violently. Jason believes that ISIS interprets the Quran better than Muslim students on campus. And that's a fundamentally backwards understanding of the world. That's an alternative fact. It doesn't exist in reality. When you take the best consideration of the community in mind, that is what Sharia is all about. You're a Muslim being faithful to Allah. I'm a Christian being faithful to Jesus. And I have to take into consideration the best interests of my community. And when you do that, you don't interpret the passage about jihad violently. That was 1,400 years ago in a specific context. You don't view the passage in Deuteronomy as a Christian violently, because we don't believe when a woman intervenes in a fight that we can cut off her hand. But we do believe, as one nation, under the God that we believe in, that we can unite together in community and in fellowship and be one people, be one nation. There's no good conclusion to that. All right, hold on a second. Sorry. I should have stopped when I was doing well. Vote yes to tonight's proposition. Thank you.
So is it possible for us to put up a new voting poll? Can we do that again? All right, so vote if it's possible. Be one of the first ones before they lock you. We won't have you raise your hands publicly. Except, I mean, it's your own opinion who is the better debater. If it works, that's great. Okay, great.
Is it working? It's still the pre-vote.
Yes. Go with the pre-vote and we'll see what happens, right?
We can't vote.
Sorry about that. Where is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Already got that.
Polls already maxed out.
All right, let's vote out. All right.
Like, how many people voted?
Yeah, I don't know if
That's like 3 or 4 people.
I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure how many people that was. We'll try to figure that out what the max is. I'll look it up. You can Google, pull everything, figure out what the max is of people. That will give you the amount of people that voted. It looks like. Okay, so this might not mean that much. We'll put up the official final outcome and stats in the event on Facebook.
Vote by hand.
We will now round up. Would you like to vote by hand?
Yeah.
Well, majority rules, right? Majority rules. So, all right. All right. If you would like to abstain from voting, that's fine. I mean, there's already people who have left who voted in the first round. But we'll ask first for anyone who would like to vote, whether Islam is compatible with the United States, whether your answer is maybe. Please raise your hand if your answer is maybe.
All right, got rid of that.
All right, 3 people. If your answer is yes, please raise your hand. If your answer is no, please raise your hand. All right, thank you very much. Now, we'll have a hand voting of who is the better debater. If you would like to vote for Mitch as the better debater, please vote your hand.
We all lost. We all lost.
2 hours later.
2 hours later. Then you vote.
Love you. Alright, so just
Just skip those results.
What do you have, a question or?
I thought we were doing it full.
All right, thank you very much for coming. There's Baklava and Skittles in the back.
Okay, they're totally different.
Please talk with Solen. He has some advice.
The back.
yes.
All right. They're open till 11.
Ooh, got some here too, Phil. It's like a chart. So we have to do the constitution. The law, I mean, I say, yeah, here's the laws.
Check mark. Just a definitive answer that you would not know.
That's stuff on cue.
Yeah.
It's not about that. No. Okay. Good job. That was amazing.
Alright, let's go to Spring. Yeah, that was the stunt. Does he do that all the time?
I got it. Yes.
Oh, I see.
Okay. And it's only a bag release, and I'm worried if I tear the bag.
I think he can go off live now.
Oh, printers, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Your printers don't work. Was it the refund you couldn't figure out where that was? No. I don't know what happened. Yes, we're gonna go offline. I mean, it doesn't matter. If they're watching, it's great. Bye, guys. We'll see you next time for another amazing.